but just short answers and sort of make eye contact with the person who's asked the question, if they're in the room. So this one is, how do we get a competent analysis for our homes? And Greater Manchester has an organisation that does this, and I think that's Lisa's question. Any answers here?
Just a comment on this. I think with recent environmental local authorities law, each house, whether not brand new or retrofit, has to have energy saving certificate.
Yes. Yeah.
You know,
Okay.
either
I'm going to
from
stop you
okay.
because this is about how to find someone. So I know Di, for example. Have you got anything to say on this?
Well, I was just trying to think what to say. There is there's over the last few years, there's been a kind of rethinking about how the retrofit business is done, and so there are newly prescribed procedures and so on, which include making an assessment of your house and coming up with a medium-term whole house plan so that you aren't doing things in the wrong order or things that don't ultimately make sense. But how you find somebody to do it, I'm not exactly sure what I can say. An architect should be able to do it. There are things called retrofit designers, which could include architects or could be others. And there are things called the PAS 2035 procedures that people should be ideally certified to that. But exactly how you get it, the trust mark might get you somewhere, but I don't think it's working perfectly yet.
Thank you, Di. So the next question is, when you're looking for a building contractor and will be looking seriously at who to choose, how will you know if they have whole house experience of retrofit? And the short answer, I think, is you won't. Would you agree with that, Di?
Yeah, you'd be very lucky to find.
Yeah.
I mean, there will be a handful.
Right, Di says that there'll be a handful.
But I'm not sure I know the handful.
You can always ask to see
Can I
projects
just add some information? These firms for the energy saving certificate or the retrofit, I think some of them have to be licensed, the same as the gas engineer or the social housing when they come and do annual gas safety service. Yes?
There's a leaflet on the table about
the
rethink
so
group from L14, and they are currently retrofitting homes in L14, and they're social housing. I think they're doing 200.
Yeah.
So I would get in touch with them, and their leaflets are on the table. Okay. What if there's no roof space?
Well, there are ways of getting around no roof space, but exactly what... Sorry. Yeah. There are ways of putting insulation in where there isn't a roof space. each one has to be looked at individually. I don't think I want to say anything very, yeah.
You might be able to answer this one, so I should
Okay.
read it out.
All right. What risks at the join for external insulation between you and neighbours? No, I mean there are. It largely depends on how well you can get on with your neighbours, like lots of things. If you have external wall insulation, you're allowed to push it on up to the boundary. Usually that's the midline of the party wall. I'm talking about a terraced house, sort of semi-detached. It makes a bit more sense on thermal grounds if you go a bit further, but you would obviously need the approval of your neighbour for that. Yeah, I think those are the things
I think those two go
I would
together.
say. Okay, right. What's the cost of MVHR? That's mechanical ventilation, heat recovery. Right, what's the cost? Well, how long is a piece of string is the first answer. The bit of kit, the actual unit, which is usually a box, sort of this sort of size, depending on how big your house is and so on. I haven't checked the cost recently, but something like £1,000 or something. But the expensive bit is MVHR systems, well, the kind of standard ones. You have to duct the insulation into every room and then a separate set of ducts going out from your bathrooms and kitchens. So you've got a lot of ducting snaking around the house, and putting that in might be pretty complicated, expensive and disruptive. So that's usually the bigger problem, or it might not be much of a problem if you're doing a lot of other work at the same time. So there isn't a simple answer for that, I'm afraid. There's how to ensure insulation doesn't lead to damp. That's a big question and it's complicated. I think that's all I can say, and it depends very much on circumstances and so on. I can't give a generalised rule, but yeah, a good designer should be able to take the, ameliorate the risks, shall we say. But by and large, external wall insulation is a low risk from a condensation and damp kind of risks. And internal wall insulation is potentially quite high risk. So you've got to be careful, and maybe it means that you don't put in as much insulation as you would have liked, but you can improve things quite a lot from where you started at low risk, and then or you can use some fancy materials like they call them intelligent vapor control layers, and perhaps to get into that you might really want to do some fairly sophisticated and I think probably quite expensive analysis of the properties of your brick. When I was doing John's house that was mentioned, we'd got in a firm and they put on sensors on the inside and the outside of his brick walls for a week and took all sorts of measurements, made all sorts of calculations to say how absorptive the brick would be and how it would behave, and therefore we could use this amount of insulation and so on, and it should be safe. But to some extent it's kind of magic thinking. I don't quite know how the sums all work out myself. Yes, that's
one more, and then I'll pass it over to
how to do there are names of competent contractors who do internal wall insulation. There's only one that only the one that I've used on John's house is the only one that I can say with some that he understands. I think he understands. I think he does. But I'm not. I think that's probably an overly pessimistic to say he's the only one in the region. I'm sure that's not the case.
Is that one? Yes, so
I've
that's
read
that one. So there's two here, and I think I'll read them out, but I think what we'll do is we'll make sure that the information goes on our website at some point. That's the name of manufacturers of air-to-air heat pumps, and who are the manufacturers of solar roof tiles, if you want to go that way rather than solar roof panels, and also names of installers of solar tiles. Unless someone's got a quick answer, I will take these away and do some research on that, maybe linking in with other people.
I think on the heat pump is Mitsubishi or Samsung.
Yeah,
Ready-made units, and very popular.
Mitsubishi and Samsung.
Economy. Samsung is cheaper than Mitsubishi.
Okay,
South
thank
Korean,
you.
Samsung, Mitsubishi, Japanese.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And there's two more that are going to be answered over here by Ross.
Yeah, so that it was really good to hear. Is that personal experience, Di, about that stuff? Just I'm a passive house designer and architect as well, so there's a few things I think to bear in mind, like we're just talking about the damp and potential for risks associated with insulation. That I think just bear in mind. It's about breathability as a key one. But if you talk to an architect or a specialised designer, they will be able to recommend that. And there's all sorts of warranties and things like that you can worry about. So one of the questions I've got here is: if internal wall insulation is done, are the plasterers who can recreate the decorative cornicing, and are insulating panels possible, leaving original features in place? So yes, the internal wall insulation is necessarily destructive to a certain extent of the existing features, because you have to obviously lose the thickness of the insulation to go on, and that's usually in the region of 100 mil if you're talking about like a standard retrofit. However, there are new technologies coming out, and one of them I'm looking at the moment is called termoisanti, which is an Italian lime plaster with aerogel embedded into it. The idea is, I think that is twice as efficient as the equivalent depth of PIR insulation, the sort of standard plastic, non-breathable, high-performance insulation. So that's a plaster. So in theory, you could recreate it in plaster. About 30 mil will give you about the equivalent of about 60 mil of the other. And that looks lovely. I'm trying to do it in my flat at the moment, but it's quite expensive. You can definitely recreate or relocate existing cornicing, and I think that's just a specialist wet trade, probably quite expensive. And I try to do external wall insulation when I do a retrofit, purely for that reason. It's much less disruption for the occupants, and you're not using any depth of your beams. Sometimes it's not possible. What is the cost of something for ground source heat pumps, possible names of contractors? So I think that's a similar question to the one before. I think that one is definitely a system-led design. So I think Ed was talking about Kenza as an example of like a large-scale thing. They probably have small individual ones as well, but equally, no idea how long is a piece of string. Are the individual room air-to-air heat pumps reverse air conditioners? You can technically, all an air conditioner all a heat pump is an air conditioner reverse. So in theory, the technology is exactly the same. You can get a mini split system, which is basically a traditional air conditioner, like a little block you sit on the wall, and it will have a little fan unit on the outside, and it just pumps refrigerant through the wall, basically. So you're venting the heat to the outside to cool the inside. If you run that in reverse, and there are some units, I think Mitsubishi and Samsung both produce them, there's a few others as well, then in theory, yes, that's just a heat pump, and that's exactly the same tech as the large units you get on the back of the houses. The more of those you run, the less efficient overall it will be. So the larger the system, although you can go too big as well. So again, system-led design, I'm not an M&E designer, but I'm aware of the risks there. But I think that's the questions.
Well, thank you very much to those.
Thank you very much to those people who asked those questions, really important questions. We got your answers from the experts, so thank you everyone. Now we're going to